I don't know why. I'm not really sure why I'm talking about this tonight. I just was in the mood to talk about it, so I'm talking about it. There's a tefillah that we say, anyone who's of Ashkenazic extraction, they could be Hasidish, Haimish, Litvish, Morax, whatever you want. Any version of Ashkenazic extraction says this tefillah on Shabbos called Avarachman. Now, the truth is that it's brought down in the Ramah. The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch and in Reish Pedalad Milch Shabbos, he says as follows. It's like a little bit of like a catch-all zone in the middle of davening. He says as follows: The meaning is to mention Haskaras HaMesim, people who died, and to mention Oiskim B'Tzarchei Tzibur. Every place kafi its own custom. Which is another additional tefillah, comes from a Zayar. And that's not included in the Yisr of asking for bakashas on Shabbos. They're also knowing to say Avarachamim. Any day when on a weekday you wouldn't say Tzidkascha, you don't say Avarachamim. They only say it when they do Birchas HaChodesh. And this follows the minhag. This is what the Ramah brings down. So the Ramah tells us about this like junction in Tefillah on Shabbos, which is between Kriyas HaTorah and Musaf, where we're anyhow looking to break up the davening a little bit between Shachris and Musaf, but we have these many insertions. Now, what's interesting is that Avarachmim was inserted at a particular time for a particular reason, and it's not the only piyut of its nature that was made up, but it's the only one that had like this sticking power. It really stuck. And I want to talk about why Avarachmim was made and what was it invented for in the first place, and why I think it got so stuck here, and etc. Now, I just want to start with a cute story. Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, when he became the Rav in Slutsk. So Slutsk was a regional superpower, like meaning there was a lot of little villages, shtetach that were around Slutsk, where the Rabbanim would be younger, more inexperienced Rabbanim who would be like somewhat, kafuf to the Rav of Slutsk. And a young Rav once came to Rabbi Zalman and he asked him, I forgot which one of these examples it was, but we had a shaila. If we're supposed to say Avarachmim on that upcoming Shabbos, it was one of these days that might be a happy day, might be a sad day. Do we say Avarachmim? And Mr. Zalman, he gave him a little this way, a little that way. He didn't give him a straight answer, and the Rav didn't know what to do. He couldn't get a straight answer. Mr. Zalman pushed him. Mr. Zalman told him, Mr. Zalman told him different answers. He couldn't get a straight answer. And after Shabbos, he comes back to Mr. Zalman, tells him, I went home. And as I was expecting, there was a big fight in shul if we should say Avarachmim, we shouldn't say Avarachmim. And Zubakoi, everybody yelled and screamed and everyone said their opinion. I had nothing to offer. I was empty because you didn't tell me that. I didn't know. I didn't have anything to say. So I says, oh, good. Like the Ramah says, Hakol kafi minig. The minig is to fight if you say Avarachmim on the Shabbos. So you did perfect. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. This is what I'm told. Now, so it's damn cute. Avarachmim is one of these like Tachnun and it's one of these things where the minig is to fight about it. If we say it, if we don't say it, when we say it, the lack of clarity is like baked into the cake. It's a little bit part of the program. Now, there are a lot of kehilas, there's a lot of interesting minhagim with Avarachmim. The original Yakesh minig with Avarachmim was to say it only 2 Shabbosim a year. They would say it last week's Shabbos, I might be off, maybe 2 weeks ago Shabbos, Erev Shavuos, the Shabbos before Shavuos, they would say it, and then they would say it on Shabbat Chazayin, which is before Tisha B'Av. And the minig was that they would say it with like a very sad nusach. They'd say it with like the tune of Eichel, like a very serious liturgical production when they said Avarachim. That was the original Yakesh minig. Over time, the minig became to say it every single Shabbos, which is most gilas. What's interesting is that Polish Chassidim, like Alexander and Ger, and like real Polish Chassidim didn't say Avarachim. There wasn't that minig to say Avarachim, pre-war, before the war, because they held that Avarachim was connected to the different piyutim that were supposed to be there. There's like different piyutim that are supposed to be at the same junction, and since the rest of the piyutim are not there, Avarachim feeds off those piyutim and they didn't say it. But in 1946, after the war, there was a little post-it note. I'll read it to you. It's in Hapardis, like a local newspaper in Yerushalayim. It says as follows: B'Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Ve'era, Huska b'Beis Medrash Shel Admar Goyne Kodesh Migor Shlita b'Yerushalayim. They announced in the Beis Medrash of the Ger Rebbe, which is the Rames, Mitam HaRebbe, in the name of the Rebbe, Lemer Tfilas Avarachim. Say Avarachim b'Chol Shabbos v'Shabbos, every Tfilah. Tfilah zu Teshamesh Me'in Kaddish Klali. This tefillah will serve as like a communal kaddish for the whole tzibur. So many people died during the war, we don't even know when they died, so this will be like the kaddish. Rather once gave a shir about that, the Israeli government tried very hard to make all sorts of holidays, and it was very controversial, whatever. But here you have the religious version of it. Like this will be like a Yom a Kaddish Klali for all the people who we don't even know when they died. And Kayidua, until now, this wasn't the minig, and I think today in Ger and probably most Polish Chassidim already, they've come around to this. And since the war, everybody says the Tefillah of Avraham. So the Tefillah of Avraham, let's just go through it a little quickly, just push it so we know what it is, and then I'll talk about why. And really, it harkens back to like the cradle of all Ashkenazi civilization, and deserves to be talked about. So the Tefillah is it's almost like a kinna. It's Avraham Sheichem Yereimim Berachim Vatzumim. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yifkad Berachim Machsidim Vayisharim Atmimim. He should be piked, meaning like take revenge. He should remember. Really, he should remember Berachim Machsidim Vayisharim Atmimim. Kilas HaKadosh Whole Kehila Shemasr Nafsham HaKadoshas Hashem. They gave their lives like Kedushas Hashem. And Na'avim V'Anaim B'Chayim, who were beloved in their lifetime of Moisim Lein Efradu. Minasharim Kalu, they were lighter than eagles. Me'arayis Gaveru, they were stronger than lions. Lasis Ritzayin Kainam V'Chayfetz Turam, to do the Ritzayin Hashem Yizkrim L'Kim L'Toivim Shar Tzadik Ha'olam. And then it makes like a pivot. It starts with this very gentle desire and request for Hashem remembering like the schusim of these previous stories of Moisim Nefesh. Then it makes this pivot in the middle, and it says V'Yinkim Le'Einenu Nikmas Dama V'Decha Shafoch. Take revenge, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for the blood of these people. Kakasa b'teres Moshe Ish Elikim. Haninu Gayimama Yikidam V'Dvika. A few psuchim like the Nevi'im Kisvei HaKodesh Nemar. And then this is like it says like, and this is the plaintive Ashkenazi plea for hundreds of years. Lama Yemur Hagayim Ayeh Elihei. Why should the Goyim who surround us, all the Catholics who surround us, who are being rid of us, who are torturing us, who are killing us, be able to say Ayeh Elihei? One of the main things that the Catholic authorities would say, that if the Jews are chosen, how could someone chosen be so broken and so beaten and so brutalized? Then it ends up Yadim Bagayim Maligvius Machator Shlarab Menachem Darchishal Ken Yerush. Everyone knows this piyut. We say it every Shabbos. It's a piyut that's divided into two pieces. It starts off with like a yizker, like remember them, and then it ends off with a desire for revenge, with Klal Yisrael begging, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take revenge on all the Goyim who raided us throughout the years. So now, when was this piyut written first? Like, where does this piyut come from? So we have to really turn back the clock more than 1,000 years at this point. There's a big the kahila of there's 3 kahilas in Germany. These are the original ancient Ashkenazi kahilas called Shum. The acronym was called Shum. It's Speyer, which is spire, Varmeise, which is worms, and Mem is Mainz. Frankfurt is much later, hundreds of years later. Yeah. Shum is Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, Magenza. These 3 like ancient kahilas, they're all in the Rhine River Basin in Germany, which was a trading route from Italy, from like the Italian provinces, where Ashkenazi Jews come from originally. And over time, as those trading routes got more developed, Jews, primarily one family, the Kleinimist family, moved to that area of the Rhine, and they settled in that area. Now, in Mainz, in Magenza, there is a Messiah that says that they're living there since there's 2 different days. Some of them claim, and this one's the least likely to be true, is that during Klal Yisrael's civil war with Shevet Binyamin, during the times of the Sheftim, a long time ago, 2,500 years ago or more, my math could be off, it could be even longer at this point, when Klal Yisrael was in a civil war with the Shevet Binyamin, a small contingent of Shevet Binyamin people ran away and ran to Mainz, Germany, which is, implausible, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. Thousands of miles. Implausible, but I wasn't there, so it's possible. That's one very, very ancient tradition that's brought down, but a more like mainstream tradition that's brought down, and this is brought down, different Rishonim bring this down, is that the Mainz Kehila was founded after the Churban Bayis Rishon. After the Churban Bayis Rishon, there were some Jews, long time ago. After the Churban Bayis Rishon, there was some, I'll read it to you how Rabbi Yosef Shamish, I'll read it to you as follows. Rabbi Yosef Shamish is one of the main sources of all Ashkenazi Messiah. A lot of the minhagim that we have come from him. He's a very authoritative source. He writes as follows. In his Sefer Ma'aseh Nisim, he says as follows. Ani Yosef Shamish, kasher hayisi bachar v'lamadati b'yeshiva b'Fulda. I learned in the yeshiva in Fulda. Now this is written in the probably 14 or 1500s. Maybe I'm wrong. I think 1500s. Sham Shimish Karav Hagoyin Rav Pinchas Segel Prague. No, it's 1500s. It's deep into the 1500s. Sham Shimish Rav Hagoyin Rav Pinchas Segel Prague. Rav Pinchas Hanal Sipur Mishmosh Rav Yeshua Palak. Baal Sefer Meir Zainayim. The Sma in Shulchan Aruch, who was one of the first Mefarshim in Shulchan Aruch, was the Rebbe of his Rebbe. He said as follows: Shatam shepaktu askilas v'maiza, gzeiris kashas yoysim yashem bekilas acheres hu The reason why the Kehillah in Worms was so devastated and racked by tsaros, and I think what we're going to try to cover maybe over the next few weeks is the evolution of Ashkenazi Jewry, how it was once and how it ended up, and etc. The reason why they're so devastated, he says, is Kefishi Yedua, like it's known, Bo Lekehillas Varmaiza Yehudim Beis Churban Bayis Rishon. The Jews came to settle in Worms during Bayis Rishon. When the 70 years of Galus were done, when everyone else was gathered up and was settling in Yerushalayim, the Jews of Worms refused to go up to Eretz Yisrael. The Nishru b'Varmaiza, they stayed there. Anchi Yerushalayim Kosful Yehuda Varmaiza, Shegam Ken Yazvus Hagolas, V'Yisyashu Eretz Yisrael, Kedei Shegam Him Yalu L'Regel. And the Yerushalayim Kehillah sent a letter to Worms, and they said, no, it's time to come up, come join us. The Chuvas Yehuda Varmaiza Hoysa as follows: Atem Garam b'Yerushalayim, you live in Yerushalayim Rabasi, V'Anu b'Yerushalayim Zuta. You live in big Yerushalayim, and we in Worms live in small Yerushalayim. They like their position in Worms. They're very happy. They like where they were in Goals. They didn't want to go up. Because of this Aveira, that the Kehillah of Worms, refused to go back up when it was time to go back up, is why they suffered more than anybody else. This is what Rabbi Yosef Shamish brings down. It's a legend that he's saying in the name of the Sma, which definitely carries some weight. I didn't Google when the modern city of Worms was established. It certainly wasn't around then, in the times of Bayis Rishon. But maybe there was some ancient settlement, what I'm saying? It's some sort of ancient Messiah of Jews who lived in the Rhine River Valley already then and refused to come back up, which is why they were punished so severely. Now, this Kehillah, Magenza, Mainz, was the most chashiv, at least in the early days. Magenza had yeshivas, the Talmidim of Rabbeinu Gershon lived there. Rabbeinu Gershon himself, I think, lived in Mainz. Rabbeinu Gershon is like what we call a bottleneck in Ashkenazi Jewry. Like all the Messiah ultimately tracks back to him. So he's like 1,000 years ago in Magenza. Magenza had yeshiva. It was a very big bustling town, and over time there was a king. I think he was King Karl, but these names are interchangeable. But King Karl, I think, invited many Jews to come live in this area, and the cities of Worms, Magenza, and Spires, grew up to be like a very prominent area where people lived over there. Like I mentioned, it started from one family, from the Kleinwitz family, and eventually they settled down there. Now, all of our Torah, like I said, all of our Torah comes from there. Rashi, Rabbeinu Gershon Aragayla, who learned by the Gaonim, he lived in that area, and his Talmidim are all of Rashi's Rebbeim, and Rashi's Talmidim are all the Balei HaTosfos, the Rabbeinu Tam, and the Ri, and the Rashbam, and the Rivam, and their Talmidim are all the other Rishonim that we know, and their Talmidim are more and more, hundreds of years of Rishonim, all stam from this bottleneck, like in the Rhine River Valley. Now, so literally you could say like Mipiyam Anuchayim, all the Torah that Klal Yisrael has. Again, the Sfardim were doing their own thing. The Sfardim have their own Messiah, and that's their own world. But the Ashkenazi world, all of the Messiah that we have comes from there. So many of the tefillas and the piyutim that we have, I forgot his name. Lazar Kalir, Rav Shimshon, Rabbeinu Shimshon, Rabbeinu Kleinimus, many people. Lazar Kalir is not from there; he's earlier. Big need in whoever Lazar Kalir was, and when he lived, it's a whole shmuz on its own. But tons of the piyutim that we have come from there. So it's like mamish the place where all of the Torah started. Somebody made a calculation that from the Tkufas Rishonim, now we don't have all these things, and not all of them are published, but from the Tkufas Rishonim, in that area, there's 2,500 svarim, like Sifra Halacha, that were published from that area. So mamish, like all of the Ashkenazi Torah comes from there. Now, as is well known, in the year 1096, which is the Hebrew year of Tatnu, is the Xeris Tatnu Taf Nun Vav, which is 1096, is the first crusade. Pope Urban, I think, gave a call to the faithful, and he said that the Muslims have conquered Jerusalem, the site where JC lived, and we have to go back and conquer it. And he raised an army. This is in 1095 that he made this call. He made this papal bull. He raised an army to try to go fight with the Muslims. And for a short amount of time, the Crusaders were Matzliach. The whole thing was about 100 years of success, but they controlled little pockets of Eretz Yisrael different times. Now, as is well known, many of the local Goyim said, if I'm going to fight an infidel, why do I have to wait till Jerusalem to find an infidel? There's infidels living there's all sorts of deicidal Jews living amongst us, and they turned their attention to the local Jews, and the Kehillas of Shum, these three kilos of spires, worms, and magenza were struck brutally. Now, I want to read a little bit from the Kinna that describes it, because the Kinna gives dates, specific dates, and it will start on explaining to us how some of the minhagim of Avarachim began. And this is a Kinna from Reb Kleinus Bar Yehuda of Magenza, who was a first-hand witness, an eyewitness to the destruction. He writes as follows. He says, I want to cry for the dead, the killed of spires. B'sheni, the second month, so Iyar. B'shmeina bayan, the 8th of Iyar, b'yayim mergoya hukra, mergoya l'regoya nechlfu l'havir nerga b'chur chamed l'yishish yadar. So the 8th of Iyar is when the town of Spire was sacked, and all the Jews were killed. Then he continues on, he says, Kihilas HaKadosh harigasam hayom b'zachra, kahal varmaiza b'chainono b'chura, ga'ini eretz v'nekiya tahara, pa'amim kitchu sham v'yochel b'meira, ve'estrim v'shloisha b'chaydish ziv l'tahara. So again, Nisan Iyar, this is Iyar, on the 23rd of Iyar. Now what's interesting is Chaf Gimel Iyar was actually a tainus. For a long time, for hundreds of years, a lot of Jews fasted on Chaf Gimel Iyar. Today that fast is totally gone. When's the last time anyone heard of fast Chaf Gimel Iyar? Chaf Gimel Iyar is when they were attacked. B'chaydish b'shlishi, b'kriyas halal l'sheira, yishlimu nafsham ba'ava kshura, fine. Aladire kahal magenza hadur. Then he moves his attention onto the town of Mainz, the city of Mainz, which was the most prominent. Now, listen to these words because they'll be very familiar to us. Minisharim kalu me'aroyes l'skavera. Those same words that are used in Avarachim are used in the Python to describe the victims of Magenza. He says, they were light like eagles and strong like lions. Ishlimu nafsham al yichud shem hanayir v'aleim zak ashever ashara al shnei mekatshik hayem ha'erev al churbanos ma'at mikdash. And then he says, b'chaydish hashlishi b'shlishi, on the third month, which is Sivan, the 3rd of Sivan. Noisiv l'daven me'ira chaydish hashenepach liyagim v'tzara. The chaydish that was supposed to have Matan Torah in it ended up turning into the month where they were destroyed. So over this tkufa of like less than 2 months is when these three extremely prominent kilos, who are like the anchor tenants of Ashkenazi Jewry, were sacked and destroyed, with the dates and times given of those times. Now, because of this terrible tragedy that befell this part of Klal Yisrael, so they had Tanesim. There was definitely local Tanesim that were established in those days. We'll see, maybe next week we'll learn about the Chaf Sivam, but there was a Tainus of Chav Gimel Iyar, the different, Minhagim Svarim of early Minhagim Svarim bring it. But in that same Tkufa, they established the Tefillah of Avarachim. Now, what's interesting is Avarachim was a Tefillah that was meant to remember the dead and to beg for revenge. And it was established then. The first person who we see that writes it down is Rav Ephraim of Bone, who's a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam. So a little bit later down the line, but he writes the Tefillah of Avarachim, and he says as follows. It's from Ksav Yadav. It says, Tiknu Chachma Yisrael Zatzal, Lahaskir b'Shabbos Sheben Pesach Latzeres Neshamas HaKadoshim Shekitchu Hashem. They were masakin during the Shabbos between Pesach and Atzeres, which is when this happened, right? It's all Iyar Sivan that this happened. They were masakin to mention the Neshamas of Kadeshim who were killed by Kiddush Hashem. V'loyal China Masu, v'samchu al Amedu Shalumas Ha'ovecha, v'darshinan al Mois Ayavim LaKadosh Baruch Hu, Achim Ashlimim Nefesh Loi, Tavaracha Alumas Ha'avcha Zudar Ashmad, brings a raya from Medrash. Al Drash Hazeh Samchu Rabbeinu Nishmasam Eden, Lahaskir Kolos and Shekitchu Hashem. They were masakin to Mekadosh, to remember all those who were Mekadosh Shemayim. And we ask this also. Now he's later on. He's not exactly when it happened, but he's writing about this old minig in Ashkenaz to mention the tkufa. Now the way he says it, it's a tefillah that was like at a particular time of year, which makes sense. It was like mentioned at that time of year. Now over time, the not only did the time frame of when to say it change, but the tefillah itself changed. And I'll show you. There's about like if you look in the different like old Siddurim, there's about I don't know, 5 to 10 versions of Avarachim. And some of them are clearly updated like later on because they include particular tzaras that happened later on, like in future Deiris. For example, I'll read you one that says, this one is written after the Shas was burnt in Paris. V'yinkom le'inenu, it's an added line that they would add in. V'yinkom le'inenu nikmasai, v'nikmas amai, v'nikmas teirasai. They stuck in like v'nikmas teirasai, the nakam of the Torah. There's other versions of it, meaning there's a few different versions of it, where you see clearly this tefillah was like an evolving tefillah that was being used. Now, I think that the reason why, even though all the Tanesim and the different days that were known for the tragedies faded away, the tefillah of Avarachim stayed put, is because it was very relatable. There was come out not a generation of Ashkenazi Jews that couldn't relate to what this was talking about. This idea of the Mesiras Nefesh, of the Jews who were killed from Mesiras Nefesh, and whose blood is crying out for revenge, and is worthy of mentioning at that point in the davening was something that every Ashkenazi Jew could relate to. So even though the Kehilas of Shum flourished again, they were built back up, and later on in the 1200s there's something called Takanas Shum, which is the Takanas of that Kehila, which you don't even know how many things that are in our regular, like Nosach HaTfila or Halacha or in Inyane Ishus or whatever, come from Takanas Shum. So many minhagim that made it into the Shulchan Aruch come from those Kehilas. Those Kehilas thrived again, they were built again, they grew again. But the relatability of this tefillah, the necessity of this tefillah to be part of the tefillah, stayed forever. So it's interesting. The Maril, when he brings down the tefillah of Avraham, says Hagam that there are no direct survivors anymore of those families. He says there's been so much migration, so much moving, but we're all the survivors of that civilization. We owe it all. The Maril is the most quoted minig sefer in the Ramah. The Ramah quotes him, I think, 340 times or something, quotes the Maril. And of those quotes, only like 40-something of them are from the Chuvas, like from what we would call like a serious, Chuva. Most of them are just from Minhagim that the Maril brings down. So meaning these Ashkenazi call it the cradle of civilization, of Ashkenazi Jewry, but it survived and thrived and kept going for a long, long time, all the way until, 1930s. It survived and thrived for a very long time, but I guess call it the relatability of this tefillah of Avrachamim made this tefillah of Avraham have a tremendous sticking power. And even though a lot of the other piyutim, davening was much longer back in the day. You think it's bad now. It was much longer back in the day. A lot of the piyutim that the Ashkenazim were famous for, and Ashkenazim loved to make piyutim and stick them in everywhere. Sfardim had like a clean, pleasant davening. The Ashkenazim like to schlep and add, and davening could be an all-day affair. And most of that has been trimmed away because people got tired of it, and also when there was competition from Reform and Conservative. So, everything had to be a little more streamlined. But whatever, yeah, exactly. But what did he say? He means it's not the actual keel anymore. It's not like it was wiped and started again. Not a continuous. This is what the Mirror writes. But,
were there any survivors?
Yeah, sure. There were some survivors. Yeah, there were some survivors. But in any case, what do you say? In any case, to be continued. We'll this has openings to go a lot of places. We'll see where we go, but to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.